My brother stood up at my grandmother's kitchen table and told my parents I had stolen from the family by not sharing my company stock. I almost laughed. Then I remembered that he had my grandmother's routing number saved in his phone, and I was the only one who knew why. Make sure you're subscribed because you won't want to miss how this ends. And we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. I was 28 when I got the call that changed everything. Though at the time, it just felt like another Tuesday. I was at my desk at 11 at night. 3 empty coffee cups lined up like little monuments to poor decision-making, when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Call me when you can. Nothing urgent. Nothing urgent from my mother always meant something urgent. But I was in the middle of a code review, so I let it sit. I was a software engineer at a mid-size SaaS company outside of Austin. I'd been there for 4 years, the kind of 4 years where you skip vacations and work weekends and tell yourself it'll be worth it. And it was. The company had just been acquired, and as part of my original offer letter, I had vested equity, real equity, not the kind that evaporates. After taxes, my payout came out to just under $310,000. It was sitting in my brokerage account, and I had not told a single person in my family, not yet. I was still trying to figure out what to do with it. Pay off my student loans, maybe finally move out of my apartment and into something with a second bedroom. Start building something real. I called my mother back the next morning. She picked up on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting. Nora, she said, and that was all she needed to say. My name in that particular tone, soft and reproachful at once, was a whole sentence by itself. Hi, Mom. Your brother called me last night. A pause. He said he ran into someone from your company at a bar. Someone who mentioned the acquisition. I set down my coffee mug. Very slowly. He's hurt, Nora. He feels like you've been hiding things from the family. I hadn't been hiding anything. I just hadn't announced it yet. There's a difference. Mom, I literally just got the paperwork sorted last week. Well, he's known for a few days now and he's been stewing. You know how he gets. Another pause. Your father and I have been talking. And that was the sentence that turned my stomach cold. My brother. I'll call him by what he was to me in that moment, which is the reason I grew up watching my back, is 34. 6 years older than me. He had what our parents called a rough patch about 5 years ago, which is a very gentle way of saying he sank $40,000 of borrowed money into a food truck concept that lasted 8 months. My father co-signed the loan. My grandmother, who was 79 and sharp as a tack but trusted her grandchildren completely, quietly contributed $20,000 of her savings because he told her it was an investment with guaranteed returns. The food truck failed. My father paid off the loan over 2 years. My grandmother's $20,000 was just gone. My brother called it a learning experience. He was currently living in a rented townhouse, driving a leased truck, and working in sales for a flooring company. He was fine. Not thriving, maybe, but fine. He had a wife and a 5-year-old and a life that was functional, if not spectacular. And he had spent the last several years watching me build something quietly, methodically, the way I'd always done everything. And I could feel him watching even from 1,000 miles away. What have you and Dad been talking about? I asked. We think, my mother said with the careful phrasing of someone who had rehearsed this, that given everything the family has been through, and given how much your grandmother has always done for both of you, it would be the right thing to do to share some of what you've received. Not all of it. Just something meaningful. Your brother is really struggling. He wasn't struggling, but I didn't say that yet. Mom, this is money I earned from stock that vested because I showed up for 4 years and did my job. I know, honey, I know. But family is family. I finished. I know. She told me my father wanted to talk to me soon. I said okay. I hung up and stared at my apartment wall for a long time. What I didn't say on that phone call, what I had not said to anyone, was this. 3 months earlier, I'd been helping my grandmother organize her financial documents. She's meticulous, always has been. She keeps paper records of everything going back decades. She'd asked me to help her scan some old statements into a folder on her computer so she could access them more easily. I sat with her for an entire Saturday afternoon scanning and labeling, and I saw things I wasn't supposed to see. Transfers. Regular, smallish transfers, $300 here, $500 there, from my grandmother's checking account to an account I didn't recognize. They'd been going on for about 14 months. The memo lines were blank or listed things like reimbursement or family support. 14 months of transfers. I did the math in my head without meaning to. It was close to $9,000. I didn't say anything that day. I told myself maybe my grandmother knew about them. Maybe she'd set them up herself. I filed it away in the part of my brain that holds things I'm not ready to deal with, and went home and didn't sleep well for a week. Now, sitting on my couch after that phone call from my mother, I pulled up the photo I'd quietly taken of one of those bank statements before I left my grandmother's house. I looked at the account number the transfers were going to, and I started to think very carefully about what I actually did for a living. I wasn't just an engineer. My specialty, the reason the company had hired me and kept me, was data systems. Specifically, I built and audited internal financial reconciliation tools. I knew how money moved. I knew what paper trails looked like. I knew what it looked like when someone was trying to obscure one. The call with my father happened 2 days later. He was calmer than my mother, which was always more frightening. My father has this way of sounding reasonable while saying unreasonable things. He'd been an operations manager for most of his career. He was used to framing things as logistics problems with obvious solutions. "Nora," he said, "I'm not going to pretend this isn't a sensitive conversation, but your mother and I feel strongly that the equitable thing here is to acknowledge what your brother is going through. Dad, I'm not responsible for what he's going through. No one's saying you are, but you've been given a significant opportunity. A windfall, really. And family is about more than individual gain." I asked him carefully what he was actually proposing. He told me they thought I should give my brother $50,000 as a gift to help him stabilize his finances and maybe restart something entrepreneurial. He used the word entrepreneurial. I told him I'd think about it. I did not tell him that I'd spent the previous 48 hours pulling every scrap of financial information I legally had access to and building a very detailed picture of where my grandmother's money had been going. The account receiving those transfers belonged to my brother. I couldn't prove that definitively yet from what I had, but the timing, the amounts, the pattern, it was exactly the kind of thing I'd been trained to recognize. And when I cross-referenced the start date of the transfers with something my grandmother had mentioned to me once, offhandedly, about my brother asking her to help him with a cash flow situation, the picture got a lot clearer. I needed more. I wasn't going to walk into a room and accuse my brother of stealing from a 79-year-old woman without being certain. I called my grandmother directly. I didn't tell her why. I just asked if I could come visit that weekend and help her go through a few more things. She said she'd make her pot roast. I drove 3 hours on a Friday afternoon. We ate dinner and watched her shows, and I helped her with a crossword puzzle. And then, gently, I said I wanted to make sure her accounts were all in order and she wasn't being charged any unexpected fees. Banks do that sometimes, I told her. Little maintenance fees that add up. She pulled out her folders. And I asked her, very casually, about the recurring transfers. She looked at the statement for a moment. Then she looked at me. "Oh, those." She said it the way you'd say, "Oh, that old thing." "Your brother asked me not to mention it to anyone. He said he was embarrassed about needing help, and that your parents would be upset." She folded her hands in her lap. "He said he'd pay me back when his work situation improved." "How much?" I asked had he told her the total would be. She frowned. "He said it would just be a few months, maybe 4 or 5,000. She paused. "Is it more than that?" I kept my voice even. I told her I just wanted to make sure she had all the information. I showed her the full 14 months of transfers on her statement. I watched her face go very still. "I didn't know it had been that long," she said quietly. He kept saying just a little longer. I covered her hand with mine. I told her I was going to look into it and that she should not send any more transfers until we'd talked. She nodded. She looked small and tired, and I had to hold something very hot and very still inside my chest. On the drive home, I called my lawyer. I had a lawyer. I'd gotten one when the equity situation got real, because that's what you do when actual money is involved and you're not naive about it. I explained what I'd found. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Okay, we need to move carefully here. This could be elder financial abuse depending on the amounts and circumstances. But before we escalate, we need to document." I spent the next 3 weeks documenting. I built a spreadsheet. Of course I did, tracking every transfer, every date, every amount. I pulled what public records I could. I cross-referenced my grandmother's statements against her known expenses. The total of the transfers, by the time I had the full picture, was $11,400, spread over 14 months, in small enough increments that they looked like nothing individually, but together they were methodical. They were a plan. In the meantime, the family pressure continued. My mother texted me links to articles about generational wealth and family cohesion. My brother called once, left a voicemail that managed to be simultaneously pitiful and accusatory. "I just think it would mean a lot if you could find it in yourself to help," he said. Like I was the one who'd been taking money from an old woman while telling her not to tell anyone. Then my father sent an email, an actual formal email with a numbered list. It laid out his reasoning for why sharing my equity was the morally sound choice. Point 3 specifically cited our grandmother's lifelong generosity to both of us as a basis for a sense of familial debt. The irony nearly knocked me off my chair. I printed that email. I added it to my folder. My family called a gathering, not a confrontation, they said. A family conversation. At my grandmother's house, which felt pointed. My parents, my brother and his wife, and me. My grandmother would be there too, which my family clearly thought would soften me. They didn't realize she already knew what I knew. I drove down the night before. I had dinner alone with my grandmother. I walked her through everything I'd found, all of it. I was gentle and I was clear. I showed her the spreadsheet. I told her what my lawyer had said about her options. I told her I wasn't going to do anything without her knowledge or consent. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I want it to stop, and I want my money back." I told her I'd handle it. The next afternoon, everyone gathered in my grandmother's living room. My parents on the love seat. My brother and his wife on the couch. My brother already doing the thing he does where he sits with his arms crossed like he's the one being wronged. My grandmother in her armchair. Me with my laptop bag. My father opened with a speech about family unity. My mother added something about how she hoped we could come to an understanding. My brother looked at me with the expression of someone who had already decided how this was going to go. Then he said, "Look, Nora, I'm not asking for much. You got lucky. That's great. But some of us didn't have your timing. I'm just asking you to remember where you came from." I looked at him for a moment. Then I opened my laptop. I said, "I'd like to talk about Grandma's checking account." The room shifted. My brother's wife looked at her husband. My parents looked confused. My grandmother looked at the floor. My brother said carefully, "What about it?" I turned my laptop screen so the room could see. The spreadsheet. 14 months. $11,400. "These are transfers," I said, "from Grandma's account to an account registered in your name. They started in March of last year. She was told it was a short-term loan of $4,000 to $5,000. She was also told not to tell anyone." I paused. "She's told me she never agreed to 9 months of additional payments beyond that, and she would like the money returned." The silence in that room was the loudest thing I've ever heard. My brother's face went through about 6 expressions in 4 seconds. He landed on outrage. I can't believe you're doing this. It's private. That's between me and Grandma. You had no right to go through her accounts." "She showed them to me," I said, "and she's sitting right here." Everyone looked at my grandmother. She met my brother's eyes, and she said very quietly, "I didn't know it had gone on so long. I want my money back." My brother looked at my father. And that's when I saw it. The flicker of recognition on my father's face. He hadn't known. My mother hadn't known. This wasn't a family conspiracy. This was my brother, operating alone, counting on everyone's faith in him and my grandmother's love for him to cover his tracks. Richard, my father said. It came out flat and hollow. Just his name. My brother, Richard, because I'll use his name now, started talking fast. It was a loan, he said. It was always a loan. He'd been meaning to pay it back. He'd had a hard year. The commission structure at his job had changed. His wife looked like she was hearing some of this for the first time too, which told me something. My mother said, very softly, "You told us you were fine." I let them sit with that for a moment. Then I said, "I want to be clear about why I'm raising this here in front of everyone. I'm not doing it to be cruel. I'm doing it because for the past 2 weeks I've been asked to give $50,000 to a man who has been quietly taking money from a 79-year-old woman and swearing her to secrecy. Those two things can't coexist." I closed my laptop. I'm not giving anyone anything. And Grandma needs to be paid back in full. My father looked at Richard. Then he looked at me, and for the first time since this had started, he didn't look like a man with a logistics solution. He looked like a man who had miscalculated badly. My brother tried a few more angles. He said I was making a scene. He said I was punishing him for a mistake. He said I'd always had it easier than him, always been the one who didn't need anything, and it wasn't fair that I was using that against him now. His wife put her hand on his arm and said his name quietly, and he stopped. The meeting ended without resolution, which was honestly fine with me. I didn't need their resolution. I had already talked to my lawyer. The following Monday, my lawyer sent a formal demand letter to my brother on my grandmother's behalf. I'd helped my grandmother find and retain her own attorney the week before, a woman who specialized in elder law. The letter documented the transfers, characterized them as an unauthorized and undisclosed loan obtained under false pretenses from a vulnerable adult, and demanded full repayment within 30 days or the matter would be referred to Adult Protective Services and the district attorney's office. My brother called me that night. He wasn't outraged anymore. He was scared. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "You could have just talked to me." "I tried to talk to you at Grandma's house," I said. "You told me I was making a scene. I would have paid her back." "When?" I said. "After I gave you $50,000 so you'd have breathing room? With what money exactly?" He didn't answer that. I told him to talk to his wife and figure out a repayment plan. I told him if the money was back in my grandmother's account within the 30-day window, no further action would be taken. I told him if it wasn't, my grandmother's attorney would proceed. He paid it back. It took 28 days. It came in 2 installments. I imagine there was a painful conversation with his in-laws involved, or maybe he liquidated something. I don't know. I didn't ask. My grandmother's attorney confirmed receipt of the full $11,400, plus a modest amount to cover her legal fees, which had been included in the demand letter. The fallout in my family was quieter than I expected and more lasting. My parents didn't call me for 3 weeks. When my mother finally reached out, she said she needed time to process everything. I told her I understood. She asked if I'd known about the transfers before the family gathering. I told her I'd suspected for a while but wanted to be sure before I said anything. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "You were right to be sure." That was the closest she came to an apology, and it was enough. My father called a week after that. It was a short call. He said he'd been thinking about the email he sent me with the numbered list. He said he was embarrassed. I told him he didn't need to be embarrassed, but that I hoped we could agree that what I'd done with my equity was my own business. He agreed. He sounded tired. Richard and I have not spoken since. His wife sent me a text, about 6 weeks after everything settled, that just said I didn't know about any of it. "I'm sorry." I believed her. I wrote back and said I knew, and that I hoped things were okay. I meant it. My grandmother called me on a Saturday morning about 2 months after everything. I was at my kitchen table drinking coffee and reading, and I almost didn't pick up because I thought I'd missed a spam call. But it was her. "I wanted to tell you something," she said. "I've been thinking about it. I waited. I know it was hard, what you did." Saying all that in front of everyone. "I know it cost you something." I told her it hadn't, really. that it had been the right thing. Still, she said, I want you to know, I see what kind of person you are. I always have. She paused. Your grandfather would have liked you very much. He was like that too. Quiet and careful, and then, when it mattered, very clear. I had to put the phone down for a second. I looked out the window at nothing in particular and took a breath. Thanks, Grandma, I said. That means a lot. I moved into a new place 2 months after that conversation, a 2-bedroom with a small balcony and enough light that I actually want to spend time in it. I paid off my student loans, every dollar, on a Thursday afternoon and then went for a long walk because I didn't know what else to do with the feeling. I set aside a portion of what remained in an account I don't touch, earmarked for things I haven't figured out yet. I didn't give anyone $50,000. I did send my grandmother a gift, a weekend trip to an inn she'd mentioned once, years ago, that she'd always wanted to visit. She went with her best friend from her church. She sent me a photo of the two of them at dinner. Both of them dressed up, both of them laughing. I keep it on my refrigerator. Some mornings I think about what my brother said, that I'd always had it easier. I used to let that land on me like an accusation. Now I know what I know, which is that easy isn't a thing that just happens to you. Easy is what it looks like from the outside when someone has been working very hard for a very long time and you weren't watching. I was watching. I was always watching. And when it mattered, I knew exactly what I'd seen. I still think about that Saturday afternoon at my grandmother's kitchen table, the way she looked at the bank statement and said quietly, I didn't know it had been that long. There was no anger in her voice, just a kind of tired bewilderment, the look of someone who had trusted completely and been counted on to keep trusting. That's what stayed with me. Not the confrontation in her living room. Not my brother's face cycling through its expressions, not even the demand letter. It was that sentence. She hadn't known. She had just kept sending money because someone she loved asked her to, and she believed him. What happened in this story wasn't complicated at its core. Someone with less integrity than patience found a quiet source and drew from it slowly, carefully, in amounts small enough to seem like nothing. And it worked. For 14 months, it worked. Because the person being drawn from was good and trusting and loved him. That's how these things operate. They don't announce themselves. They rely on the decency of the person being taken from. I think about what would have happened if I'd just done what my family asked. If I'd written a check for $50,000 and told myself it was generosity, my brother would have been fine for a year, maybe 2. My grandmother would have kept sending $300 a month until her account couldn't absorb it anymore. And I would have believed I'd done the right thing because everyone around me said so. What I had to find, and it didn't come easily, I want to be honest about that, was the steadiness to look at what was actually true rather than what was comfortable. That's harder than it sounds when the people asking you to look away are your own family. There's a pull in those situations, a very strong one. To let love be an excuse for not seeing clearly. But I'd spent 4 years building a career on the principle that numbers don't lie if you read them right. I wasn't willing to abandon that the moment it became personally inconvenient. The discipline it took to document everything before saying a word, to build the spreadsheet, make the calls, confirm every transfer before walking into that room. That wasn't coldness. It was the only way I knew to protect something true. Because if I'd gone in half-prepared, emotional, with accusations instead of evidence, my brother would have made me the story. He almost did anyway. But I had the receipts, literally, and that changed what was possible. What I keep coming back to is my grandmother's photo on my refrigerator. Her and her friend at that inn, both dressed up, both laughing. She earned that trip. She earned that ease. She spent decades being generous with people who didn't always deserve it, and what she deserved in return was someone who would pay attention when it mattered. I was glad I could be that, not because I'm exceptional, but because I'd done the work, built the skills, kept my head clear, and refused to let being loved be used as leverage against doing what was right. That, I think, is the only thing worth taking from any of this. Integrity isn't tested when it's easy. It's tested when the people asking you to compromise it are the ones you do almost anything for. I wasn't willing to do that, and my grandmother got her money back.